Welcome to the Liminal Witch podcast, a space for those who walk the edges, dance in the thresholds, and find magic in the spaces between. I'm Summer Star. I'm a liminal witch, a ritual goods crafter, and I'm an intuitive reader here in Salem, Massachusetts. If you've ever felt like your practice doesn't fit neatly into one category or tradition, or if you feel pulled to the provocative edges of the unknown, then this podcast is meant for you. Welcome back to the Liminal Witch. This is episode 3, and today we're diving into the deep, transformative energies of 2025. So this year is rolling out this sort of introspective red carpet for anyone that's brave enough to dive in and listen to their own unfiltered truths. This year is an invitation to shed, transform, and align with your truest self so the Wheel of Fortune turns in your favor in 2026, instead of repeating the same old tired cycles. 2025 is so significant because it brings a powerful trio of symbols. It's the year of the snake. Numerologically speaking, it's the year of the Hermit and the year of the number 9. Each of these symbols on their own holds their own really powerful energy and wisdom, but all combined together, they become sort of this superpower for introspection, for honesty, for courage, and a willingness to shed the old, get rid of what no longer serves you, and make space for the new. It's a year that asks, what are you willing to let go of, and how willing are you to be vulnerable in your truths in order to become who you're meant to be? So let's start with an overview of each one on its own. First, we're going to start with the snake. According to Chinese astrology, 2025 is the year of the snake. And the snake itself is this really powerful chthonic symbol of rebirth and transformation. They shed their skin not as a choice, but because they have to. It's necessary. They do it because they've outgrown their old skin. They do it to remove parasites, and it renews the most important layer of protection that they have against the world. I'm sure you've observed this process, whether on TV or in person. Most people are familiar with how a snake sheds its skin. But when their skin is ready to be removed, the snake's eyes, they get really dull. It restricts their vision. They can become kind of slower and maybe a little more clumsy. And when it gets to that point of being too tight and too restrictive, then they start to rub against the ground or rocks or trees or, whatever they have in their vicinity until that layer starts kind of peeling away from their face, and they work it until they can finally start crawling out of it and inch their way out. And once they emerge, they're totally renewed. They're beautiful. Their scales, assuming they're healthy, their scales are glistening, and they're just they look really well hydrated and shiny. And think about all of that metaphorically. Imagine that you're stuck in this old skin that you can't get rid of, or you won't get rid of. You're kind of sitting in this old, stale version of yourself. And calling it stale doesn't mean that skin never had importance, because at one point it was the freshest, most beautiful version of you. But now it's old, it's making you blind, you might be clumsy, you're probably vulnerable to being preyed upon. And the only way to renew your sense of clarity and get back that freedom is to just let it go, crawl out of it. It's not easy. If you watch a snake, it's not a quick process. It takes a while, and they're very vulnerable to being preyed upon while it's happening. And even once that snake sheds their skin, they might be beautiful and glossy and fresh, but that skin or those scales, they're really tender until they have a chance to acclimate and sort of harden to their new environment. And we're the exact same way. Every time we remove a deep layer that doesn't serve us anymore, it's really liberating and refreshing. We feel that cleanliness and that sparkle. But we're also really prone to vulnerabilities until we have a chance to get used to wearing this new skin or this new version of ourselves. So it can be really intimidating. We don't want to be vulnerable. We don't want to feel weird in our skin. We just sometimes we want to just stay in the old dry, crusty stuff because we know it, even though it's not the best version of us. Because of all this, you can really understand how powerful snake symbolism can be for renewal and rebirth. And keep all of this in mind as we discuss why this year is so potent for growth and transformation. Okay, so moving on to the Hermit. Most of you are probably aware, but just in case you're not, the Hermit is card number 9 in the major arcana in tarot decks. And it's sometimes often misrepresented, or I don't know if that's the right word, maybe the better word is limited, to being viewed as sort of, only a symbol of isolation. And isolation and solitude, it can imply loneliness or the feeling of, just being cold and all alone and left to stumble our way through the dark. But it's so much more than that. While it symbolizes solitude, it also symbolizes wisdom and introspection and the solitary journey of seeking truth. And the Hermit doesn't walk alone because they're lost. They walk alone because they're seeking this truth that can only be found in these quiet spaces. They carry a lantern, and if you think about a lantern's light on any deep, dark path, you're not going to see your destination. You're really only going to be able to see the next few steps in front of you, if at all. And it's important to recognize that even though the Hermit gives off this vibe of solitude, solitude doesn't have to mean loneliness. It doesn't mean you're lost. It's just that in a world where we're constantly bombarded by the noise of society, even right now as I'm recording this, I don't know, what time is it here? It's about 5:45 p.m. local time, and there's just traffic. It's constant noise. There's constant background noise. So we really don't have spaces to slip into where we can get away from that static of life, that white noise of life. So in a world where we're constantly bombarded by the noises of society, which unfortunately right now includes this constant stream of terrifying updates from the US, especially if you live in the US like me, it's really tough to just sit in silence and observe with all this chaos going on around us and the things that induce fear and anger and frustration. But despite all of that, the energies are still present this year. And the Hermit is really begging us to carve out time, because removing that noise and entering into this sacred liminal space, even just for a little bit, where we can hear nothing else but the whispers of our intuition, it helps us reconnect with our inner compass, where we're able to gaze upon the next steps that are illuminated by the lantern and trust that we're headed in the right direction, even if we can't see the destination. Because sometimes just taking that next step is all you need to do to keep moving forward, one dimly illuminated step at a time, in deep truth and trust that you're on the right path. And it's important to remember that the Hermit's path, it's one of self-mastery. It's not one of instant gratification. It's about sitting with your vulnerabilities and trusting that discomfort and allowing your inner light to guide you forward, to use your inner light as the Hermit's lantern to illuminate your next steps. The Hermit teaches that growth doesn't come from ignoring the hard stuff. That's not what we're trying to do. It comes from illuminating the truth that sits in our shadows, navigating the best path through it, and emerging with a super renewed clarity and direction. So moving on to the number 9 and why that's relevant this year. Numerologically, 2025 is a 9 year. But how you come up with that is 2 plus 0 plus 2 plus 5. So 2025, that equals 9. And that's how we identify this year as the year of the Hermit. But the number 9 on its own also has highly impactful implications when you combine it with the Serpent and the Hermit. 9 is a number of completion, of culmination, of release. It's a final number in a single-digit sequence. So counting 1 to 9, it's the last number in that sequence. And as a number that signifies the end of a cycle, it carries that weight of everything you've built, everything you've broken, everything you've learned along the way up to that point during this cycle. It's where all the threads of your story converge. All your lessons, your failures, and your triumphs, they all arrive together at this point where you need to make a choice about what you're going to carry forward and what you're finally ready to release or leave behind. And while 9 is all about ending cycles, it's also related to what you're going to do after those endings. So how are you dealing with closure? How are you going to deal with this call for transformation? And how are you going to turn any changes that happened or any perceived losses into opportunities for wisdom? The 9 asks you to transmute any of the pain and any of the struggle that you've experienced in your journey so far into growth, so it can be grounded in self-compassion and resilience. It kind of dares you to take what you've learned, however hard won or lost, and don't just power through because of it, but use it to create change. And it's hard as hell. That's not easy. But if there's ever a year to put in the work to bring cycles to a close, to figure out how we're going to process those closures in a way that's constructive and healthy for us, this is it. Okay, so now that we've briefly discussed each of these 3 aspects, the Serpent's energy, the Hermit, and the power of the number 9, you can probably recognize that they all have the potential to have a powerful impact on our ability to take serious steps on the path of personal growth. So now what do we do? What I can do, hopefully, is offer a variety of suggestions for working with these energies this year. It's up to you how deeply introspective you're willing to get, how much you're willing to just shut out the noise and listen to your truths and just dive in and embrace them and shed everything else that no longer matters or that holds you back. And the extent that you're able to do that in your own life is purely up to you. But I have a couple suggestions with maybe how you can deal with some of these energies and navigate some of these energies to your advantage. So it's important to note that because the energy of the Hermit is present this year, this is not a year for rushing forward into action. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't take inspired moves or prevent yourself from taking action if that feels right. You might be in a situation where you need to act fast, you have complete clarity, you know what you're doing, awesome, go for it. But if you're trying to navigate through what is my truth, what do I actually want, how do I get there, don't feel like there's this pressure to act on it now. Because again, this year is about introspection. It's about taking that time to just sit with these thoughts, Take time to reflect, to release, and to rebuild if necessary with the clarity and purpose that you need to align with your deepest truth, no matter how vulnerable it might feel to acknowledge them. So the process of introspection and really peeling away our layers to allow room for true transformation and that metamorphosis, it takes time, but this is your year to honor that process. But trust that by shedding these layers and closing cycles related to what no longer serves you, you're creating a really fertile ground and a super strong foundation for the next cycle of growth and abundance in your life. And it's also important to remember that that next cycle, it's going to happen whether or not you do the work. But the critical question is, are you going to indulge and repeat the same bullshit that isn't working? Are you going to finally step up and acknowledge your truths and make lasting change and be the strongest advocate you can be for yourself in this next cycle? I suggest spending some time really digging into introspective prompts. So a good way to do this is to journal every day if you can. The thing with journaling is that I've found, at least for me, a lot of times when I free write and I just write whatever comes to my mind and, answer whatever question I'm asking myself, I might think I just wrote a bunch of garbage on the paper and it doesn't make sense. And what good was that? What did it do? What good did that do me? But I actually find that when I look back in these journals, whether it's a week later or 6 months later or even years later, what I thought in that moment didn't make sense until that next time that I referenced it. Don't discount passing thoughts. Write it all down because at some point it might make absolute perfect sense to you and it's the exact thing you needed to hear from your past self in that moment. But when you journal on these things, ask yourself questions like, what do I actually want out of life? Who am I when no one is watching? When you're by yourself in your house or there's literally nobody around you, or you're hiking in the woods completely alone. Who is that person? Who are you when no one is actually watching and you're not afraid of being judged? How would I show up in the world and in my life if judgment and rejection were not possible? Whose comfort do I prioritize over my authenticity and why? When did I first feel like it wasn't safe or it wasn't acceptable to be my authentic self? Who are the people in my life that encourage me to shine? If I nurtured myself the way I nurture others, what would change? Digging into questions like these, it can really illuminate where you sell yourself short in favor of others, or maybe where you sacrifice your self-expression to avoid rejection. It might even highlight relationships that just need to go in order for you to come into your own and to finally feel alive inside your new skin after you shed the old. There are so many possible questions to sit with. I honestly love suggesting journal prompts for people because I do it to myself all the time. So feel free to DM me if you want me to give you a random prompt. I'm happy to do that. The links are in the episode here, but on Instagram, you can find me at Chthonic Star, or there is an Instagram for this podcast. It's the Liminal Witch Podcast with underscores between the words if you want to send me a DM. Another thing you can do, there are a handful of rituals and tasks around endings that can be super helpful and very potent in a 9-year. And these are just a couple suggestions. There's literally hundreds of things you could do. You could do an ancestral or a generational trauma release. You could do a cord cutting ceremony. Clear your space. This is a perfect time for it here in the Northern Hemisphere. We're coming up on spring. Do a solid spring cleaning and get rid of any old or outdated things that just don't need to be in your life anymore. It puts that intention out there that I am done with this old crap. I'm ready for something new. You can even write a thank you letter. That's also a goodbye letter to the version of you that's no longer needed. They served a purpose. They got you to this point. Whatever hardships you've been through, you're still here because of that past person. So be grateful and write a kind letter, but you don't need them anymore. So say goodbye to them. And you could even take it a step further and bury it. I never really encourage putting things just out in the environment because, if you think about it, if the billions of people on this planet, everybody took a piece of paper and buried it in the ground, that's essentially going to look like a landfill. So what you can do if you want to avoid polluting and do something in your home is you could write that letter, tear it up, mix it with some potting soil, and plant a new seed in that pot. So in other words, you took everything that came before, you turned it into compost. Not literally, but you know what I mean. Symbolically, you kind of turned it into this compost, this substrate that you're planting a new seed in. And you can nurture that seed and water that seed and sort of make it this symbolic growth and renewal of life out of the old. All of these acts of closure can really set the stage for what comes next and open up space in your life for possibility and potential. Until we find the courage to shed all those layers that we've probably been dragging around for years, And even like, I don't know, like if you imagine if a snake like dropped part of its skin and then just picked it back up and taped it onto itself and didn't actually shed anything, it just kept dragging it around. You're forcing yourself to remain in that serpent's limbo where you can't see clearly. You itch. You probably have some sort of parasites, human or other, and you've lost all of your luster. You're just so scared of getting rid of that version of yourself, or you don't know what life looks like once it's gone, or you think that's your only source of value. The version of you that you know is deep inside of you, that you feel, that you connect with, it's not being reflected on your outside. You're not giving it a chance to shine. And you're not even giving it a chance to be a beginner and have those sort of vulnerable scales and that vulnerable skin. You're not giving it a chance to toughen up and just see what it's capable of doing without that grimy layer on top of it. So get that luster back. Let go of those layers. Find that version of yourself that wants to emerge and give it a chance. And all of this matters this year because, as I mentioned previously, 2026, it's a Wheel of Fortune year. The wheel's turning again. It's a year of new cycles, opportunities that can align with the work that you've done in 2025. And the Wheel of Fortune, again, it's going to turn no matter what. It'll amplify what you've been indulging and accommodating. If you do the work this year, if you do the shedding, the seeking, the completing, obviously I cannot guarantee any specific results. But if you do the work, the idea is that it's then going to turn in your favor. And I get that some of it's very emotional, deep work, but if you take 0 step in the direction of you, a self-chosen step, a step toward personal enlightenment, self-growth, towards your own truths, clinging to those old things and that old outdated stuff, the wheel just might spin you right back through those same tired cycles, and you're just going to get more of the same, which there's a comfort in that predictability, but are you actually happy? Another journal question. So here you are. You're at a crossroads, a solid liminal space, especially after listening to this podcast episode. If you've gotten this far, hopefully, you have a chance to decide right now consciously, because I'm calling you out right now, whether or not you want to continue down that same old path, or if you are ready to do the work to forge a new path step by step. And again, it's going to be tough. This is a year for introspection. It's a year for digging deep and really dialing into what is my truth. And you might not even know, and it might take a lot of work for you to do that. But I will tell you, getting rid of that baggage and just sloughing off that old crap, you are going to feel so much better. Even if all you can do is take off your little eye caps and shed that, you'll feel so much better and you'll see so much more clearly. And then the next step is easier, and the step after that is even easier. The energies of 2025 are here to support anyone who wants to do the work to choose themselves. Those of you who are ready to take that lantern in hand and step into the mist and trust that your own light is going to be enough. And if you feel like you'd benefit from a little bit of extra light or a little bit of intuition on your path, reach out to me. I offer single sessions, and I also have longer-term immersive containers, like 3 to 6 month programs, and I'd love to support you on your journey. So again, thank you for stepping into this liminal space with me. I'll see you in the next episode, but until then, especially this year, walk softly, shed fiercely, and don't fear the dark. Stay liminal.